what do you have to say? What do you think of people who struggle to cross the threshold of belief when they say, I don't believe in religion, but I won't stop believing in God?
A lot of people say that, and I never really know what they mean exactly. I presume they mean that they don't subscribe to any particular religious denomination. They don't wish to call themselves Catholic or Presbyterian or Jewish or anything like that, but they believe in some sort of higher power. I would argue against them in much the same way as I argue against anybody else. I mean, I think that there are cogent reasons not to believe in any kind of higher power. There are probably even stronger arguments not to believe in a particular beliefs of a particular sect, like the belief that Jesus was born of a virgin, or that wine turns into blood, or something like that.
The world is frightful, and many need religion to cope. Should they be left alone?
I think it's important to recognize that it is a kind of mental placebo, that it does comfort people. But it's also important to recognize that because something is comforting, that doesn't make it true. But I think it's important not to make the really obvious logical error that because something is comforting, therefore it's true. I mean, that is a very common error. And of course, once you realize that, it's no longer comforting, but that's true. I think that's one part of the answer, is that you have to distinguish what's comforting from what's true. But the other part is to say, actually, is it all that comforting? I mean, is it a bit of a myth that you need religion in order to be comforted, to be consoled, to be reassured? Some people say, well, people who are afraid of death might welcome the consolation of thinking that they will survive their own death. But since most of them believe that there's a very good chance they'll go to hell rather than heaven, how comforting is that? And I mean, I know of an old man at the moment who's entering extreme old age, and he's absolutely terrified of hell. And he's the sweetest, kindest, goodest, most righteous man you could imagine. But apparently he did some terrible thing when he was a young man. Goodness knows what. I imagine something terribly innocent, perhaps of a sexual nature or something. And he's now haunted by the fear of hell. And any number of people are haunted by the fear of hell. So it's a two-edged sword, this thing about life after death. And the other thing is that even if you do go to heaven, do you really want to go to heaven for 1 billion years? Beyond the time when the sun swells to a red dwarf and engulfs the earth and you go on playing your harp. Even the 72 virgins might begin to pall. Well, I'm not so sure about that. But actually, a little bit more seriously, I think that to the extent that death is frightening, what's frightening about it is the idea of eternity. The human brain is not equipped to cope with the idea of eternity. And I sort of feel that eternity is sufficiently frightening that I want to, just as I wouldn't like to have my appendix out without an anaesthetic, I want to spend eternity under a general anaesthetic. And that's what's going to happen.
This question actually goes to, again, something I'm sure you've dealt with many times. The question of morality. Since there is no God, why should we be kind and be good to each other beside the fact that it's the right thing to do?
I presume the person who asked that didn't really mean it. I mean, the idea that the only reason somebody is moral is because they're religious is an idea that's little short of disgusting, actually. I mean, it suggests that we're all mercenary and that the only reason we're good is that we're frightened of being found out. Maybe that's true. If it is true, it's a rather ignoble reason. As for the suggestion that we get our morality from Scripture, well, I certainly hope we don't. And as a matter of fact, we obviously don't, because many of the moral precepts that you would find in Scripture are nowadays universally agreed to be horrible, like stoning people to death for breaking the Sabbath, or for adultery, or for minor peccadillos. So we don't, as a matter of fact, get our morality from Scripture, and we certainly shouldn't.
Here's a really good question. what would you say are the costs? It says reveal the costs, not necessarily financial, of superstitious thinking.
Well, superstitious thinking, if you include homeopathy and things like that, quite a lot of people have actually died because they have put their trust in bogus quack medicine rather than the best medicine that science has to offer. As you know, if an alternative medicine is proved to work, it ceases to be alternative and becomes medicine. So that would be one cost of it. Waste of time, I suppose, would be another cost of it. I mean, the sheer amount of time people spend on their knees, totally wasted. The misery that it causes, personal human misery. That again is not a financial cost, but it is a very real human cost. I'm sure all of you can add to that list.
Back to science fiction. Question is, advanced civilizations on exoplanets.
Well, there are current estimates say there are about 10 to the 22 stars in the universe, as far as we can observe the universe. Probably most of them have planets, so the number of planets is probably more than a one with 22 noughts after it. So statistically, it would seem a pretty powerful argument that there probably is life elsewhere in the universe. We can't be sure of that. We have no direct evidence of it. If there is no other life in the universe, but we know there's life here, then the immediate inference from that is that the origin of life, that event which I was talking about earlier, whether it's RNA, whatever it is, the origin of life on this planet would have to be a quite staggeringly improbable event. Mm-hmm. For something to only happen once in 10 to the 22 opportunities for it to happen would mean that it's so improbable that when we try to answer the question that the earlier questioner asked, how did the origin of life happen? It had to have been an event so implausible, so improbable, as to be well nigh impossible, and yet it did happen. Because there were 10 to the 22 opportunities for it to happen, it only happened once. And by definition, the place where it happened has to be here, because here we are. That's a version of the anthropic principle. I don't believe that for a moment. I don't think it was that improbable, and it follows from that, therefore, that I believe that there are lots of life forms elsewhere in the universe. They could be very few. It could be as few as 1 billion planets have life forms. And note that I use the word few, because 1 billion compared to 10 to the 22 is a simply tiny number. If there are only 1 billion planets that have life, then they're probably so spaced out that the chance that any one of them will see any other of them is very low. Certainly the chance of any one of them actually visiting any other one is very, very low indeed.